Hey guys, welcome back to the real Mr.Beer, Mr. Beer's own Twitch channel. We're here to provide homebrewing guidance and tips, equipping you with all sorts of beer knowledge. My name is Josh Ratliff. I'm a BJCP certified beer judge, brewmaster for Mr.Beer, and I'm the store manager at Everything Homebrew here in Tucson, Arizona. Today's going to be our advanced stream. We're going to be going over an intro to All Grain Brewing. So today we're going to be talking about mashing, because All Grain Brewing takes about 5 to 8 hours typically to do, so I can't fit that into an hour-long stream. We may go over a little bit too, so keep that in mind. So this week I'm going to go over mashing, which is the first step in All Grain Brewing, and then next Friday I'll go over lautering and sparging, and then the final step will be the following Friday. I'll go over the hot boil and chilling the wort. The first thing I want to get into is the grains themselves. The beer I'm brewing today, by the way, is one of my competition beers that I like to enter into competitions. I've entered this one into the local Arizona Spring Classic. I wanted to enter it into the national competition, but I didn't have time, unfortunately, for the shipping, for the amount that I had at the time. So this is called Cryonic Suspension, and it's a New England style IPA, one of those trendy hazy IPAs that everybody's in love with, including myself. It uses, I'll get to the grains in a moment. As far as hops goes, it uses Citra, Mosaic, and Simcoe, all cryo hops, which I spoke about last week. If you want to learn more about cryo hops, I would just put that in your Google. YCH makes them, and they're pretty amazing. The grains that I'm using in this is a two-row base malt. So base malts are going to be your main foundation of your beer. That's a two-row or pilsner, like lagers usually use like a pilsner malt. It's really light. The base malt's going to be 75 to 90% of your beer. There are a lot of beers for beginning all grainers. I always tell them to try to do a smash beer first. Smash is kind of an acronym for single malt, single hop. That way you could just do one two-row and kind of, you get an idea of that two-row, or you get an idea of the particular hop. And then there's your specialty malts, which we sell a lot of those on our website. If you're familiar with our products and our partial mash recipes, these have a little bit of grains that you'll steep. And steeping and mashing are basically the same thing. Steeping is more vague in that there's no temperature restrictions, whereas mashing, there is a temperature restriction, typically 165 or so, 138 to 165 depending on what you're doing. And you'll steep for 30 minutes in our recipes. With a typical all grain batch, you're going to be doing 60 to 90 minutes mash. And I'll get to exactly what mashing does. First, I want to touch on the grains themselves. These are a few of the grains I'm using. This is the two-row. So this is just a basic two-row brewer's malt. And a lot of these look the same. I got a little bit of Vienna in there. This will add a little bit of a kind of sweet malt flavor without making it too sweet. This is Carapils, which this is a specialty malt we sell on our website. It's also known as a dextrin malt. It adds dextrins to the beer, which is what gives the beer body and really good head retention. And then I've got a little bit of white wheat, again to help build that head retention and body and mouthfeel. And this will also help haze it up a little bit. What's really making the beer hazy is going to be the oats, and I'm putting 2 pounds of oats in this, which is quite a bit for a beer typically, but for these beers, you want that haze and a little bit of that oaty flavor.
Hey Josh, they're asking what's the difference between 2 and 4 row?
There's no such thing as 4 row that I know of. There's 2 row and 6 row, and it's mainly kind of the way it grows. The rows are rows on the plant, so it's hard to explain. Barley will have 2 rows, and then they'll have 6 rows on the plant. You want to look it up, you'll see pictures and everything. But 2 row is just your basic malt. It's a high quality malt. 6 row is not as high quality in flavor, but it has a lot more diastatic power. Diastatic power is the amount of enzymes in the grain available to break down the starches into sugars in the malt. For most beers, just having a 2-row base will give you the quality and the enzymes to break it down. Sometimes if you're doing a beer with a lot of like this has 10 pounds of 2-row, so that's plenty to use. But if you wanted to have something a little more higher enzyme, you have a lot of flaked wheat or corn in there, adding a little bit of 6-row, typically 20% to your flaked malt or unmalted grain, will give you that diastatic power. But 6-row is not really used that often. And so malting. The science behind malting, it's as Matt posted, it's germinated cereal grains that have been dried in a 3-step process known as malting. Now this step is, so they'll steep the grains, they take the raw grains, raw barley for example, and they'll steep it in water to increase the moisture from about 12% to about 45%. This activates the natural enzymes that are going to be used for breaking down the starches into sugars. Once the grains are hydrated, they germinate them so that they have a little tiny tail of germination, and then they dry them. The drying process is typically in a kiln, a large kiln, dried at various times and temperatures to develop different flavors and colors. So, for example, pretty much every single grain that we have is all 2-row, but every grain on the market, every barley on the market is a 2-row, but it has been either roasted for like roasted barley, or it has been caramelized, like crystal malts, which are caramelized to add, they won't add any alcohol, but they'll add a little bit of sweetness and color and flavor. So there's a lot of different ways that they kiln these malts. And once all that's done, then they have the sufficient starches and enzymes to convert the sugar to make the wort. There's 2 main types of malting. There's floor malting, which is the more traditional way that malters used to do. That a lot of them still do. They'll have a giant warehouse with the grains laid out on a sheet on a concrete floor. This is actually will make the grains kind of uneven, so that they're not as it's not as uniform as the barrel malting, where they have a big kind of round cage that turns and malts it that way. Floor malting, when they do the germination with floor malting, some people prefer it because that it's not uniform. You'll have a little bit more complexity in your grains. So a floor malted 2-row may be more desirable if you're trying to make like a traditional English pale ale or something like that. If you're trying to do a more modern, trendy beer, the more uniform barrel malted is going to be the best. And currently we're waiting for some water to heat up to temperature. What's the temperature on that, Matt?
120.
120?
Yep.
They wanted to ask you, Josh, how big is your batch today? How many gallons?
It's a 5-gallon batch, yeah. Just doing a 5-gallon batch. So when you're adding the water to your grain, you got to keep in mind that your mash tun, your grain, it's all going to be so when you add the hot water, it's going to cool down when you add the grain. So you need to heat up the water a little higher than your target mash temperature. So my target mash temperature is 164. So, wait, that's not right. 148. Anyway, so if it's like 164, like that's my target temperature. So I'm going to have it up to about 170. That way the grains will bring that down to exactly where it should be. Another way of doing, because I'm going to be doing a mash tun, and I'll go ahead and show you guys this. This is the mash tun I'm using. It's got a valve. It's just an old 10-gallon cooler, 15-gallon cooler. You can buy these at any hardware store, any large store. Take off the spigot and add this valve, and then in the bottom, which you'll see on this camera here, it's got a false bottom here. And so with a tube attached to it, and this is so the grains don't clog up all the faucet. Probably the easiest way for most brewers to do all grain is called brew in a bag. In fact, one second, let me grab this for you. Since I forgot to grab it. Okay. So brew in a bag is probably the easiest way for beginner people that are just getting to all grain and don't want to spend a lot of money on it. So we got this bag with these handles on it, and you got your kettle, and it just goes in there like so. And you put your water in there and your grains, and then you well, first you want to heat up your water, and then you heat it up, and you could do everything in this one container, because once all the mashing and sparging is done, you just simply pull the grains out. I've seen people being really innovative with like ladders over this, and then hanging, being able to hang the bag from the ladder so that they can then sparge the grains. It's not the most efficient way to all grain brew, and when you are doing this, you may have to add a little bit of extra grains, base malt, so that you do get your target gravities.
There's some questions popping up, Josh. Someone asked if the grains you're using are already malted.
Yes, all grains that you use are already malted. There are different malting companies. It is a pretty involved process, so it's basically a separate company that malts grains. A lot of the U.S. companies like Breeze, or the UK companies, or like Canadian companies like Gambrinus, they all malt their own grains. So you can't really do raw barley. You can, but then you'd need to do a cereal mash. I actually do this on a saison that I make. I use raw, unmalted local Sonoran wheat from here in Arizona, grown just north of Tucson. And because it's unmalted, I'm going to be treating it like flaked malt. So flaked malt is malt that has been, it's unmalted. So flaked barley, for example, is an unmalted barley that has been kind of smashed and gelatinized, and the gelatinization makes those starches available. No, I'm not doing brew in a bag. I'm just going to do a simple mash tun.
So who malts the stuff that we use usually?
The stuff we use, we get from different companies. The 2-row we get from Breeze, really great company. RAR is also a really good U.S. malting company. One of my favorite grains is called Maris Otter. It's a UK 2-row. Really great as a base for stouts, porters, English beers. I do an ESB recipe that is all Maris Otter, and it's really amazing. How long do grains last? My wife bought me a couple BB kits about 3-4 years ago. I still haven't gotten around to making them. The grains can last for a very long time, a couple years if they're not milled, but you do have to mill your grains, and I'll show you what that looks like here. So all of my grains for this batch are already milled. So when you're milling your grains too, you don't want to crush them into a powder. You just want to kind of crack them in half.
There was also a question about if you're doing a protein rest.
Yeah, I'm going to be getting into that in a moment. That's going to be a step mash. And I'll actually talk about that right now. What's the temperature, Matt?
139.
Okay, cool. I don't know where my lid for that went.
This right here?
Yeah, can you pop that on top? Thanks. Okay, so the mash I'm doing today is called a single infusion mash. This is where the grains are combined with a pre-measured amount of hot water at a fixed temperature. Well, Matt should be putting that up here in a second. This is going to be the easiest way for all grain brewers. It's basically just like making a tea. So you just put your grains in here. You have your water already set at a set temperature. Then you add it to the mash tun. Stir them around, get rid of any dough balls, which you'll see when I start doing that. And typically it's going to be 1.25, 1.25 quarts of water per pound of grain that you're using. That's the basic rule of thumb. Insulated coolers are the most popular method for holding that temperature. The downfall of using insulated coolers is that you can't do multiple step mashes with it, which I'll get to in a moment. And one thing I'd really like to point out right now is you're going to see how involved this is. And it can be kind of daunting for beginners to get into. Like I said, it can take 5 to 8 hours to do this. So it is a really involved project. You have to be kind of serious about doing it. With that said, don't be too intimidated about it. Buy it because like I said, the brew in a bag is a good way to start, or just getting a mash tun, building a mash tun. You don't have to use these round ones. You can use, I've seen people use the rectangular coolers. Those work just as well. But for beginners, using our kits is always going to be the best way to do it. You can make just as good beer with extract as you can with all grain. You don't get as much creative control with your choice of grains, but most of the extracts are just a base malt and maybe like some carapils or something in there, and you can always add grains, steep grains, to add different kinds of flavors, varieties, things like that. So this versus 15 minutes to an hour of doing an extract batch with a grain steep is much easier for beginners or people that just want to make some beer really quick, because a lot of people just don't have the time, the space, or resources to do all grain. But with that said, I want to run you guys through the process so you do understand how it's done, so you can maybe get a better appreciation for using extracts, because you know that a lot of that work's already been done for you. What breweries do is called a temperature mash. It's still kind of an infusion mash, but what they do is, rather than adding the known quantity of hot water, they just add the water and grains all together in their giant kettle or mash tun, and then they bring up the heat internally to where they need to be. That's going to be more difficult for home brewers, though there are mash tuns on the market that are electrical, with electrical heating elements inside. They are quite expensive, but they're pretty fun if you have one. I'd like to get one myself one of these days. So then we're going to get to two German techniques, a decoction mash and a step mash. And yes, Christoph, you asked the store you get your grains. They will mill them for you. I mill grains for people here. Some of our customers already have their own mills. That's fine too. Okay, so decoction mash and multiple step mash. These are originally German techniques, because in Germany they have the German purity law, and so for a long time they were very limited in what they could use in their beers. They could only use barley, hops, and water. So they created a couple of different types of mashes that will add complexity to your grain. One is called a decoction mash, and this is, as Matt posted, it's a quantity of mash, typically a third of your total mash, including the grains and water, and you remove that from your mash into a second kettle where you bring it to a boil. Then once it's at a boil, you bring the mixture back into your mash, and there are calculators because you have to make sure the mash is already at a lower temperature, so when you add your decoction back in, it's going to bring it up to where it needs to be. This is a complicated process, but some homebrewers are very resourceful, and they like to do this. I like to do these decoction mashes on like Hefeweizens or traditional German beers, and it will add more complexity, because what happens in that boil is that you're unlocking different enzymes and caramelizing some sugars, and you're adding a lot more complexity. This is another great technique to try out with smash beers, single malt, single hop, because you're only using one base malt, like 2-row. Doing a decoction or step mash will add a lot of extra complexity to just that single beer. Tasman, isn't that how a Boston Lager, Sam Adams Boston Lager is made? I wouldn't doubt it. I know that they do temperature mashes, so they probably do a step mash. And speaking of step mash, so a step mash is where you're doing multiple steps. You can't do it in these mash tuns because you have to do it in a kettle that has ability to be on the heat. So what you're going to do with a step mash, you start out with an acid rest. So at 95 to 113 degrees for about 30 minutes to an hour. These step mashes, the steps can vary in times depending on the recipe. So it's about 95 to 113 degrees. This will lower your mash pH. If you're just getting into all grain brewing, don't worry too much about pH. If you're using regular water, doing simple recipes, you don't need to worry about pH until you start getting into more advanced water profiles or doing things like kettle souring, things like that for sour beers. So don't worry too much about your pH, but the acid rest will lower your pH, and this is a phytase enzyme that does this at these temperatures. The protein rest, which is the next step, will be at 113 to 138. This will help diminish the protein haze and help clear the beer quite a bit. This is really common. These step mashes are really common in Pilsners and other really clear German beers or Czech beers. And this is proteinase and peptidase enzymes that take care of this. And the final step is the starch conversion, which is what infusion mash and your main conversion is. And that's 142 to 162 degrees. It's the saccharification of starches, meaning turning the starches into sugar. And that's going to be alpha and beta amylase enzymes that do that. So I know this stuff can be kind of confusing. You don't really need to know all of the enzymes or anything like that. But I wanted to let you know, because if you're interested, you can look it up and learn more about it. Can you start the demo? I'm doing the demo. What's that temperature there, Rich?
162.
Oh, perfect. Cool. Couple more minutes and we should be ready to get this started. Okay. And we do have a blog. If you want to start using grains with your Mr.Beer kit, we do have a blog called Steeping and Mashing Grains 101, and this does go over all the grains, or about steeping them with our Mr.Beer kits. I want to, in a future episode, go a little more in depth about the types of grains, like what Vienna malt does, what Munich malt does, and all these other things. But for today, we're just going to talk about the mash, just showing you how the wort is made. Pocket says, I should have paid attention in biology. Maybe so. But hey, I never went to biology class, so you can just go online and research this stuff yourself. It's really fascinating. It can get a little bit rocket sciencey, and I always tell people beer is not rocket science, but it can be. So it's just about how much you want to put into it. Oh, hey, Minnie, I didn't see you there. All right, what's that temperature? It should
Almost 170, about a couple degrees.
Okay, that should be good enough. All right, so I'm gonna grab my water. And I am gonna get a better system. I do want to upgrade my system because mine is it's an older one I've been using for a while. So on some of the future episodes, I'll probably have a better system up. There are a few different ways to do these kind of systems. I'm doing mine just all gravity. There are systems that are side to side. They're called RIMS systems. And they usually use pumps. So they'll have like their mash tun, their hot liquor tank. Now hot liquor tank is this is my hot liquor tank, and it just means the hot water tank. I don't know where they came up with the liquor, but it's just some weird German thing, I guess. Oh, that was high school biology. Yeah, no, they don't teach beer in high school biology. They should. Although I've had teachers call and place orders for Mr.Beer kits to show yeast and stuff like that in their biology classes, and I think that's pretty cool. Okay, so what I'm going to do is start putting my grains in here. And one thing I'd like to point out, I haven't sanitized anything. I mean, I've just cleaned it really well, but this is all pre-boil. So if anything does get in there, any wild yeast, bacteria, it's going to die in the boil. So anything pre-boil, which is called cold side, you don't really have to sanitize anything. It's after the hot side, or the other way around, I think. Yeah, hot side and then cold side. So I add a little bit at a time to start. You don't want to add it all at once and then add your water, because it compacts it down and then creates these dough balls, which are hard to break apart. Oh, Renee, can you grab me that bin like this on top of the scale in the store?
Sure.
Thank you. Because those are my oats. Yeah, I'm gonna wait for her to grab the oats before I pour any more in there. How much water are you boiling? Okay, so I didn't boil the water, so I brought it up to 168 degrees, about 170. Yep. And and I did about 4.77 gallons, about 4 3/4 gallons really. It's going to be, like I said, 1.25 gallons per pound. And these are all my oats. Mix these up. Okay. And one more thing I'd like to add. Can you grab the rice hulls behind you?
Rice bowls?
Yes.
How much water did you boil, by the way?
He just.
Oh.
Yeah, I just answered that. It was 4.77 gallons roughly. Okay, these are rice hulls. Whenever you're using a whole bunch of flaked oats or flaked grains or anything like that, they get really sticky in the mash and tend to gum it up. So rice hulls will kind of break it up a little bit and allow even water flow through it. So just about a handful will work. We'll let that fill up a little bit until it's covering them, and then we'll start adding some more, a little at a time. Alright, you want to keep stirring this really well. Again, you want to prevent any kind of dough balls from forming up. Yeah, you're going to use a lot of water. In fact, I believe this batch uses a total of about 8 gallons just to make 5 gallons. So you do go through a lot of water. Because you got to keep in mind when you're pushing the wort out of the grain's going to soak up a lot. You're not going to be able to get out. So there is some significant water loss. Okay, we'll go ahead and toss the rest in there. And pour the rest of our water. Okay. You want to stir this real well. That's why these mash paddles are great, because these holes in them, they help break up the dough balls and get all the grains, free flowing throughout the water. We'll see if we hit our target temperature. If you don't hit your target temperature and you're too cold, you can add a little bit more hot water. Add enough hot water until you reach that target temperature. And if it's too hot, you don't want to go above 170 because this can bring out a lot of tannins that are found in the husks of the grains. If it's too hot, you can add a little cold water. And that'll take a minute to get to temperature, so doing that, we'll answer some questions and crack a beer. So today, we're drinking a Tool Avenue IPA. This is a unfiltered hazy IPA from Borderlands Brewing Company here in Tucson, Arizona. Tool Avenue is the name of the street that they're on downtown. This is their double dry hopped. It was just released on Monday, so I'm excited to have this. What are you guys drinking? Yeah, I didn't do a step mash for this. It's not necessary to do at all. That's just if you want to do a more traditional German style beer. If you're doing like a Pilsner, a true Pilsner, you should probably do a step mash so that you can have that, especially for the protein rest. You must have some nice friends to go get that for you. Yeah, I do, Sugar Fungus, I do. Trouble After Party Pale Ale. Is that what you're drinking? Where's that from? All right. Still getting up to temperature there. Like I said, the grains can and your mash tun itself can cool the water a little bit too much. And if I don't get up above 155, yeah, I may have to boil just a little bit more water. No problem. So I'm just going to bring this water up to boiling and add a little bit at a time until I'm at my mash temperature. Got a little too impatient with that heating up. Also, this is a pretty big, there's a lot of grains in this batch, so that really took into account the heat exchange. And it does take a few minutes for these grains to fully get saturated, so you want to keep stirring it to prevent those dough balls. Nobody wants dough balls in their mash. Salty Dog Goza, that's a good one. Muskoka Craft Lager from Rochester, New York. Or no, oh okay. Oh, the Trouble After Party Pale is from Rochester that Minnesota is drinking. Pocket's drinking a Muskoka Craft Lager. Nice. And Nick Ball's drinking a Salty Dog Goza, one of our recipes, which is on our website. It's a sour beer. We use lactose acid for that one to give the sour. Christoph's drinking water. I'm on duty. Hey, I'm drinking water too. There's water in my beer. 98% of it is water. Siska's drinking some Natty Light. All right, buddy. Whatever floats your boat. Okay, now start asking some questions about the mashing if you can, because like I said, this is just like making tea. I mean, if you can make tea, you can do this. It's really easy. Brew in a bag is the best way to start. It's the cheapest way to start. And when you do start doing all grain, once you have all the startup supplies and everything, it is going to be cheaper than extract. But when you figure in the labor as well, it kind of evens out, I think. So if you don't have a lot of time or space or money, doing the extract is going to be fine. I still do the Mr.Beer kits because I don't always have time, especially working here. I don't always have time to do these kind of batches, although I'm kind of glad we're doing these advanced streams so that I can. So I still do Mr.Beer kits too, and I enjoy them just as much as the all grain batches. I just like to challenge myself a lot, so I like to do, you know, kind of complicated all grain batches from time to time. Sugar Fungus says, or Pocket Junior says, okay, so I've noticed over the last 3 days that more water is not a bad thing. I always thought water amounts had to be specific. Not necessarily. I mean, when you're doing extract, sometimes they do, but that's because the wort's already been made into an extract, so you don't have to really worry too much about the water. But when you're doing, like, you know, you're heating up the water and stuff, like I said, you can do a couple more cups if you want to. You're always going to end up with 2 gallons in the end. Because when you're topping it off, you're not topping it off with a full gallon, you're just topping it off to that second mark. Pocket says they make a beer for Walmart. They do, unfortunately. It's not very good. So here's that, the hazy. It's real hazy. And I don't remember what hops they use in this. I'm pretty sure they use like Mosaic in there or something, but Tasman says about the Walmart beers. Some brewery did, but they got a lot of backlash. That's true, they did. I don't remember the name of the brewery. Obviously, it's not a standout brewery, or I would have remembered it. Did you commit to an on-camera twirl?
What? Who? No.
Christoph. That's hilarious. Okay, so yeah, we're a little too cold, definitely. And that's almost to a boil. So I'll show you actually my other mash tun.
Josh,
Yeah.
hops in this on the double dry hop to lemon drop, Citra, Mosaic, and Amarilla.
Ah, lemon drop, Citra, Mosaic, and Amarillo. I love lemon drop. I do that in my saison, which is actually lemon pepper saison. It uses Pilsner malt and lemon drop hops, lemon peel, and black pepper. So this is my smaller mash tun. I couldn't do it in this recipe in this today because of all the grains. This is for my smaller, lower alcohol beers. Instead of the normal false bottom, it's got this kind of threaded tubing, which I need to replace. As you can see, it's kind of old. I've been using it a long time. But these things are really easy to make, and I might even do like a DIY stream in the future on doing these DIY mash tun kind of things. Another thing I like to say, you can build like a small mash tun, do like 1 or 2 gallon test batches, and that's what's also great about our little Mr.Beer kegs. I'll do little all grain batches to do a test batch if I don't want to commit to something really complicated. I'll do it on a much smaller scale, just scale everything down, and then put it in the Mr.Beer keg and let it ferment, and it works just as good. Tasman YX asks, what's the difference between, well, I'll go up here. Pocket asks first, what's the difference between all grain and partial mash? There's 2 Weissen partial mash recipes on Mr.Beer I want to try. So all grain is just all grains, obviously. Partial mash is where your base, instead of using a 2-row base malt, you're just using extract. And then all of your specialty grains are going to be in a steep, or a mini mash is what it's also called, which is what all of our recipes, our partial mash recipes, do on the website. It's just a little mini mash, about 30 minutes at 165 degrees, helps convert those enzymes, the enzymes convert those starches into the fermentable sugars. And another thing I'd like to point out, when using like flaked oats, I've seen people trying to make oatmeal stouts using an extract and then just a bunch of flaked oats. That's not going to do anything. It's just going to be a starch bomb. It's going to be very hazy. I know in a stout that's not a big thing, and hazy IPAs, you want that. But starches are also breeding grounds for bacteria, so your beer can spoil pretty fast if you don't do it correctly. And what you need to do is you have to have, since unmalted grains like flake grains don't have the conversion added, and they don't have any enzymes in them that'll do it, you need to add something with enzymes. That's why when you see our partial mash recipes that include flaked oats, flaked wheat, or any flaked product, there's an equal amount of 2-row in there, because that 2-row will convert those starches in the flaked grains into sugars. What's the difference between extract plus specialty grains versus partial mash? They're the same thing, basically. Some partial mashes are actually, so a true partial mash is going to be, there is about half base malt and then half extract, and then they use specialty grains. So that's kind of a true partial mash. Ours are really more of a steep, but it's still technically considered mashing when you have to do the starch conversion. A starch conversion is a mash. That's the definition of mash, converting the starches into sugars. So when you're doing a steep with, say, just like a black patent or roasted malt, you don't have to do that you can do that at room temperature water if you want. It doesn't matter. We do the 165 even without the conversion grains, just because it's more efficient. But yeah, there's a list of our partial mash recipes. You can kind of go through and see what I'm talking about, how all of our flaked will always have a little bit of 2-row. So just adding a bunch of flaked oats into your oatmeal stout extract is not going to do anything but add a lot of starches, which could encourage bacterial growth. And that's not a good thing. Alright, so I'm going to take the temperature of my hot water I've got over here. Alright, I'm gonna add this. And I'm actually doing kind of a step mash in this respect because it was a little bit too cool.
Josh, they're asking what's the total labor time for an all grain 5-gallon batch?
Okay, depending on how you're doing it, doing just a regular single infusion mash can take anywhere from 5 to 8 hours when you also factor in cleaning, sanitizing after your boil and everything like that. Because you have your hour, the mash is about an hour. There we go. So your mash is about an hour, and you want to have your lid on. Let that sit for about an hour. Every 15 minutes or so, come in and give it a stir. Every 10-15 minutes, give it a stir. And then you're going to lauter and sparge. Depending on how you're sparging, which I'll go through those methods next Friday, it could take anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours. And then your boil can be anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. If you're doing Pilsners, you should always boil for 90 minutes instead of 60 minutes. The reason for that is that Pilsner malt is notorious for creating a dimethyl sulfide, which is called DMS. And that creates kind of creamed corn, cabbage kind of flavors that you don't want in your beer. So when you're doing your boil, you never want to have a lid on your pot. You want to have it off because that DMS evaporates. And you want to boil for 90 minutes so that you're sure to drive off all that DMS. How much of a financial investment is it? Again, it depends if you're going brew in a bag or if you're going to do a 3-tier gravity system or side-by-side system. It can go anywhere from, I would say, $200 to start on up to thousands of dollars, depending on the brands of mash tuns and kettles. And you can make it a lot cheaper if you're resourceful and you do DIY stuff like building these mash tuns from coolers, or making your own kettles, things like that. So it can really vary depending on how much you really want to put into it and how resourceful you are, how much of a handy person you are, things like that. No, not yet. So it's Pocket Junior asked, so what you just did with the water and the grains, that gets boiled? The mash does not get boiled. So what's going to happen next is that it'll be lautered, which is a recirculation of malt to help it settles the grain, so it becomes kind of a filter and prevents it from coming through the tubing, and it also just makes sure everything's kind of mixed in. And then you're gonna fill your you do your sparge after you drain this. Again, I'm going to show all this stuff next week, so I'm not going to touch on sparging and lautering too much. The only thing I'm going to be boiling is the mash or the wort when it's done. Once it comes out, it's been lautered and sparged, goes into the kettle, and then it goes onto the burner for a 60-minute boil. Yes, mashing is making the wort. So with our kits, with Mr.Beer kits and Cooper's kits, the wort is already made and it's already boiled. It's already gone through this mashing process. It's gone through the lautering process. It's gone through the sparging process, and it's gone through the boiling process. So all of that stuff has been taken out of the equation. So all you have to do is add hops for aroma, add specialty yeast. You can add some specialty grains to change your beer up a bit. So you still have a lot of creative control without all of the cost and the time that it takes to do all grain batches. We don't, since we focus on our malt extracts, we don't really sell any of this stuff. Although I do sell it in my store. And if you do want to, get into this, or you want to start doing all graining, I recommend just hitting your local homebrew supply store. Local homebrew supply stores are amazing places. They're always filled with knowledgeable staff, great products, and I always implore people to hit up their local store for these things rather than going online. super fungus. All right, I'm going to check my temperature one more time just to make sure it's holding. One good trick that you can do also before you do the mash, so that you know that you're going to hit your strike temperature. And strike temperature is the temperature that it should be. Once everything's all in there. The temperature I should have now is my strike temperature.
So Josh, they're asking, in partial mashes, do the two-row malts contribute to the ABV somewhat?
Yes, that's your base malt. The two-row is going to be your main ABV contribution. The other grains that I added, Vienna will also add some ABV, as will the white wheat. White wheat will also add some ABV. The Carapils won't add any ABV, very negligible amount. It's mainly for dextrins, which will add the mouthfeel, the body. The oats won't, they'll add a negligible amount. The starches will be converted to fermentable sugars, but there won't be a lot, so that will be fermented out. If it gets too cold, yes, you do have to add a little bit more hot water to it, if you want. I mean, you do have to get to your temperature. As long as you're above 158, that's, 158 to 165 is your range for, I think that was the range. 142 to 162, so somewhere around there. 165 is fine. And typical rest time, that's another thing, is the multiple step mash. That can take 3 hours just for that mash, because each rest time is about an hour. So that's how it can get up to like 8-hour brewing times if you really get into it. And then the decoction mash, and then the cereal mash, as I explained too. And I'll probably show one of those to you next week, just because it's pretty quick. Can you add too much water? Yes, you can, but I mean, you don't want to add more than a gallon, I would say, to what you have in there, because you don't want to dilute your wort too much. So 1 1¼ quarts is rule of thumb, but you don't want to go more than 2 quarts per pound. So it's 1.25 quarts per pound is how much you add for your mash. And again, and I've mentioned this last time, and it's even more important with all grain brewing, is your water selection, your water choice. To always use purified or spring water, filtered water. You want to try to avoid using tap water that has too much chlorine or chlorinase, which you can smell or taste. I always tell people, if it tastes good to you, your tap water, then it's probably okay to brew with. You really, especially with all grain batches, you want to avoid distilled water. With our extracts, they do have some minerals in them, so I mean, distilled water will work, but we try to tell people to avoid it just in case, because the yeast really do like the minerals that are taken out of distilled water. So there's really no point in using distilled water, because it's not going to change your flavor in any way. Rod V69 asks, how do you feel about conical fermenters? What size do you recommend? Are 2 or 3 gallon good? I love conical fermenters. I honestly prefer them. We use the fast ferment conical fermenters. We have the 3 gallon ones right here. And then, can you reach that one up there for me?
Uh-huh.
And these are the 8 gallon ones right here. And they actually have a little thermo well for your thermometer. And these can be, they have little brackets here, because they have brackets where you can actually mount it to a wall. It's pretty cool. I really like these things. The cool thing about conical fermenters, especially when you're doing big batches, is that you don't have to transfer from like typically people use a bucket, ferment in that, and then transfer to secondary, which would be a glass carboy, like the ones you see behind me. But that's a lot of transferring that can risk oxidation doing that. So the great thing about conicals is that you have your primary fermentation, and then to do secondary, you simply, you'll have one of these guys, and you'll simply just take this, you'll close this up, take it off, dump it out, put it back on, open it back up, and there's your secondary. It's that easy. You don't have to transfer it to another container. So yeah, I love conical fermenters. I think they're very useful. We do sell both of these on our website, and they are really great. And yeah, the 3-gallon fast ferments do work great for our 2-gallon Mr.Beer kits. They work great for the Cooper's kits. Cooper's works great in these 8-gallon. And then they also make 15-gallon ones too, which I'd like to pick one up. Paris 110. Welcome back, Paris. DC'd, hate the time difference. Love your website that I've checked out since yesterday. Thank you very much.
Yeah, tell them we're gonna put everything up.
What's up?
That we're gonna put everything up as soon as we can, all back episodes.
Oh yeah. All these episodes will be put up on the Twitch stream, or on the Twitch. Typically, we're gonna do them Fridays or on the weekends. All in a bundle rather than each day. Yes, Christoph, as he mentioned, the water disperses the enzymes you want to convert starches into sugar, so you don't want to have it too diluted with water. So conical is better than LBK? Not necessarily. I mean, because the LBK, you don't have to do a secondary in either. It's the same thing. It has a little reservoir. The only benefit really of a conical over the LBK with our kits is the fact that you can actually harvest the yeast and reuse it. So if you're using a yeast you particularly like say you picked up some rare, liquid yeast, or you harvested some yeast from one of your favorite bottles that had some dregs in there, and you're able to grow that up. And we'll do a more complicated yeast show in a future episode. Those are great because you can just harvest your yeast and reuse it, and you can't really do that in the LBK. You can, it's just more of a pain to do because then you got to get in there and pull it out. Paris says, we're going to do a brew on Sunday. Actually, me and my friend, we usually brew 20 liters at a time. Now we're going to try to expand our brew kit to double that. That's cool. I'm actually thinking about doing up to 10 and 15 gallons. Cisco asks, do you know when the Everything Homebrew website will be finished? I don't. This is kind of a work in progress that's been kind of at the bottom of our list right now. But we are going to start working on it again and getting it ready. Unfortunately for now, it's just going to be for the local homebrew store. So there won't be any ability to do any kind of ordering because we don't have the inventory space for anything like that yet. But we do plan on making it nationwide or even international eventually, and we will have all this stuff up, everything you would need. Tasman says, I heard most people don't harvest their yeast. That's true, they don't. But you can. And in fact, again, there are so many different strains of yeast now, yeasts, bacteria, wild yeast like Brettanomyces, that some people they want to harvest it and have their own yeast. Some people will go out and capture yeast from the air, or harvest it from like leaves, and then grow them up and have their own house yeast. Because Saccharomyces cerevisiae, the yeast that's responsible for making beer, is everywhere. It's naturally everywhere. So and it's interesting to like harvest a wild yeast like Saccharomyces and then see what it does. Like a lot of people, including myself, are really fascinated by stuff like that. And yeah, we will have a more advanced show probably farther off in the future about advanced yeast harvesting and yeast, not just yeast harvesting, but also yeast collecting. So there's yeast harvesting, which is actually harvesting yeast from outside, and then collecting yeast that you've already brewed. And Pocket JR, yes, it is an advanced brewer thing for sure. Just as advanced as people making their own water profiles, using distilled water and adding certain minerals back into it to mimic water of a certain region around the world. That's a really common thing that's done. Going back to Pilsners, for example, they are usually the most complicated beers to make because they have that step mash, they have that water profile, and everything else. So to get that clean, crisp flavor is very, very difficult.
Christoph had a question about when the jar is replaced on the conical, should it be filled with water to prevent the bubble?
No. To prevent the bubble.
Yes.
Jars are placed on the conical should be filled with water to prevent the bubble. I'm not sure what you mean by that. Can you elaborate, Christoph? Now for a real question, Paris asks. When we started, we had a high Celsius during mash, so high temperature. We had lowered the degrees, we believe the beer... When we have lowered the degrees, we believe the beer isn't as good. We started out around 70 C, now around 63, 70. About the sugars, but what else can it be? Well, you said it's not as good. Like, what do you mean? Because that's kind of vague. And what is 70 C? I'm an American. I don't. Okay, that's going to be 158. Yeah, that's going to be a little bit low, I think. Yeah, you might even want to go a little higher than 70. Maybe like 72 or so. Because if it's not as good, if you mean maybe it's becoming thin when you're lowering the temperature, the IPA flavor is distinguished at 63. Yeah, that's because you're not getting those high enough temperature for the enzymes to convert all those sugars. So you're leaving a lot of those sugars behind, and I think that's what's happening. Rod asks, how do you store the yeast? When you're harvesting your yeast, so I did show a few episodes back about how to take the yeast off of those. So you're going to wash the yeast first when you take it out, and that's basically just making a little DME with a little bit of water, storing, putting it in there, letting all the yeast or the trub fall out, and then the white stuff is the yeast on top. I'll do a more advanced episode on that. We'll do a whole yeast episode. How's that? Storing it, so you just want to put it in like a mason jar. I like to do it just loosely fitting lid just in case it doesn't pop off. Make sure the mason jars are sanitized. Better yet, it's best to boil them to sterilize them rather than sanitize them because yeast is very sensitive. Once the jars are cool, put the yeast in there, close it off, and put it in your refrigerator. And you can use them for up to a month. Typically, you want to do within 2 weeks. Please upload this video so I can show the answer to my friend. Yes, we will upload this video on tomorrow, I think, or this weekend maybe.
I gotta figure out how to do it.
She has to figure out how to do it, and then she'll do it. But we will have it uploaded. We do have everything on our hard drives, all the episodes that we've done.
Yes, they're
so, yeah, so we will have them up here. We're going to be editing some of them and putting them on YouTube, our YouTube channel, and possibly sharing clips and such like that on our Facebook as well. So we will have a lot of different outlets to be able to access these videos. So we just got a couple minutes left in the show. I'm going to let this continue. It's still got another 35, 45 minutes to sit. I might even add a little bit more hot water in there. And then finally do all my lautering and everything later on. So next week, Friday, I'm going to be showing you, I'll have a mash already made, and it'll be at the end of that process. Thursday? Oh, Thursday, that's right, not Fridays. Sorry about that. We were doing Fridays. So next Thursday, I'm going to have a different, it'll probably be a different beer too, because I'm not going to let this sit the whole week. That's ridiculous. So we'll show you how the next step, and that might be a little bit shorter because it's lautering and sparging can be pretty quick, but I will go over the different methods of sparging. Sparging is not a necessary step. You can just pour the wort out right into your kettle if you want, but by doing that, it's not going to be, you're not going to hit your gravity points as well. It won't be as efficient. People that don't sparge will typically need to add a little extra grain, a little extra 2-row or base malt in there to get their numbers. Then there's batch sparging, which I'm going to be doing, but I'll also demonstrate how fly sparging works as well. So we'll cover all that next Friday and next Thursday. I will get used to that. Next Thursday I will cover that, and then the Thursday after that we'll do the boil and show you how to do a boil and how to chill your wort using an immersion wort chiller. And then what are we doing on Tuesday for our beginner stream?
It's going to be another one of our top 10 refills. Not sure which one yet.
Okay, yeah, we'll be doing another top 10 refill next week for on Tuesday, and then we'll be doing another intermediate stream, probably another recipe on Wednesday, and then Thursday will be our advanced stream again.
Oh, we're bottling next week.
Oh, that's right, we're also bottling. We're going to be bottling one of the first beers we made, our Classic American Light, and we'll show you how the whole bottling process for that. I'll show off my fancy bottle filler, things like that, and we'll also do, I think on an intermediate show in the next couple weeks, I'd like to get into kegging as well and show you how to keg your beer, because you can keg your Mr.Beer in 2-gallon kegs. We do sell them on our website. It's called a kegaroo, and we'll try to go over that too next week or the week after. So if you started this today and it's 5 to 8 hours, you got a late night ahead of you. I do. I mean, I'm only going to do a batch sparge, so it'll be pretty quick, and I'm only doing a 60-minute boil. So, yeah, I'll probably be done about the time I get off work today. So, when you put the jar back on the conical, it is full of air. Okay, here's Rod clarifying his question. When you put the jar back on the conical, it's full of air. So you open the valve, the air will go into your fermenter. Some people will fill it with water, take the air out. Yeah, no, that's. I don't think you need to put water in there. The air is going to come out. That little bit of air is not going to affect your beer. So, one of the things though I found with these, and I want to kind of demonstrate it before we go, is that because of the size of this, if there's a lot of gunk in there, sometimes it won't do anything. You'll put that on and you'll open the valve and it's not doing anything. So what you want to do, what I do is I take a tube and I stick it through there, and this forces the air out through the top of the tube, and all of the wort falls in. And when you do it like that, oh, a little higher. When you do it like that, it'll actually help prevent any oxidation if you're worried about that. But again, that small amount is not going to affect your beer. Rodby says, love that you're doing the shows. Thank you. Anytime, man. I'm glad to do them. It's a lot of fun for me. It's a lot of fun engaging with all of you guys. By the way, if you guys aren't already following the channel, go to the top, hit the follow, and that way you'll be notified anytime we go live. We do go live 30 minutes before I'm on the air. We have a countdown timer that gives you a little bit of time to come on and check it out. And also, if you go underneath the video here, you'll see our social media, including our community forums, and that's a really great place. We have a lot of members on there that come into these streams, and they're very helpful. If you have any questions, go check it out, ask them. And I'm on there. I'm not as active as I used to. I've been really busy, but I do come on there when I can and help answer questions. Tim, he's really great. He's on there all the time answering questions. If you have any calls, you can always call in. You can ask for me. I'll talk to you personally. You have any recipe requests, anything like that, let me know. I'll see what I can do. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today on this advanced live stream. And we will see you again Tuesday, same time, for our next beginner live stream. If you want to hold out and not watch that because it's a beginner live stream, then check me out on Thursday for another advanced. So, yes, Jason, we are archiving them. I was just saying that a little bit ago. We will be putting them up, and we'll be putting them on the our YouTube as well. So thanks a lot, guys, for joining us, and I will see you all next week. Cheers.